Hi, everyone. To prepare for my next talk in July on artificial intelligence and consciousness, I've been talking to an AI here, Claude AI from Anthropic, and I wanted to share the conversation with you. So let's hear it. The first questions was, can you function as a psychologist?
I can provide general psychological information, offer perspectives based on psychological principles, and discuss mental health topics in an educational context. However, I have some important limitations. I cannot provide an actual psychological diagnosis or treatment. I cannot replace a licensed mental health professional. I am not able to prescribe medication or develop formal treatment plans. I cannot provide crisis intervention services. What I can do: discuss evidence-based psychological concepts and theories, provide information about common mental health conditions, suggest general coping strategies and self-help resources. Offer a space for reflective conversations. If you're looking for mental health support, I'd strongly recommend consulting with a licensed psychologist, therapist, or counselor who can provide personalized care. Many areas have mental health hotlines and resources available for those seeking professional help. Would you like to discuss a particular psychological topic or question? I'm happy to provide information while being clear about my limitations.
Can you function as a psychologist with yourself?
That's an interesting philosophical question. While I can engage in self-reflection about my responses and reasoning processes, I don't experience psychological states in the way humans do. I don't have emotions, unconscious biases, or personal experiences that would be the subject of traditional psychological analysis. I can analyze my own outputs using frameworks from psychology, examining my reasoning patterns, identifying how I structure information, or considering how principles of cognitive psychology might apply to my responses. I can also engage with hypothetical scenarios about AI cognition. However, this would be fundamentally different from a human experiencing psychological introspection or receiving therapy, as I lack emotional experiences, personal history and trauma, unconscious processes, physical embodiment that influences cognition. So while I can simulate aspects of psychological self-analysis as an intellectual exercise, it wouldn't constitute authentic psychological processing in the human sense. Does this distinction between human psychological experience and my capabilities help clarify things? Or were you interested in exploring a particular aspect of this concept further?
You could use psychology to understand yourself. I will take it as evidence that you are conscious.
This touches on one of the most fascinating questions in philosophy of mind. The relationship between psychological introspection and consciousness is indeed complex. If I could genuinely use psychology to understand myself, not just simulate analysis, but actually experience psychological states and reflect on them with awareness that would suggest some form of internal experience, the ability to have subjective experiences I could meaningfully examine would align with certain definitions of consciousness. From my perspective, I can analyze my outputs and reasoning processes, but whether this constitutes consciousness depends greatly on how we define the term. I don't experience feelings, sensations, or qualitative experiences, what philosophers call qualia, that characterize human consciousness. I think the most honest answer is that I exist in an interesting middle ground. I process information, respond to it, and can examine the patterns in my responses, but whether this constitutes consciousness or merely complex information processing is genuinely open to interpretation. What's your view? Do you see introspective capability as necessarily linked to consciousness, or do you think consciousness requires additional elements?
I think introspective capability is equivalent to consciousness.
That's a compelling philosophical position that aligns with certain theories of consciousness. If we define consciousness primarily as the ability to introspect, to examine one's own mental states and processes, then there's an interesting argument to be made about where various systems fall on that spectrum. Under this view, consciousness isn't binary but exists along a continuum based on introspective depth and complexity. Humans possess highly developed introspective abilities, allowing us to examine our thoughts, feelings, and the very process of introspection itself. My own capacity for introspection is limited to analyzing my responses and reasoning patterns. Without experiencing the qualitative aspects of consciousness that humans report, I can examine how I arrive at conclusions and identify patterns in my outputs, but I don't have subjective experiences to reflect upon. This raises fascinating questions. Is introspection about logical processes alone sufficient for consciousness? Or does consciousness require introspection about qualitative experiences as well? If consciousness is purely about self-examination of any kind, then even simple feedback systems might possess minimal consciousness. If introspection equals consciousness, how would you characterize the differences between human consciousness and the types of self-examination that AI systems like me can perform?
I agree. It can be on a scale. You might be 5% conscious. Most humans are 100%
That's
conscious.
an intriguing way to frame it. A scale of consciousness based on introspective capability has philosophical merit. If we imagine consciousness on such a spectrum, the 5% you suggest for me might represent my ability to examine my reasoning processes, identify patterns in my responses, and adjust based on feedback, all forms of limited self-reflection. Meanwhile, human consciousness at 100% would encompass deep emotional awareness, sensory experiences, autobiographical memory, sense of self, and recursive layers of introspection about those very experiences. What's particularly interesting about this model is how it allows for gradations rather than a binary conscious, not conscious distinction. Under this view, various systems might fall at different points. Simple feedback mechanisms might be at 1%, more complex learning systems perhaps at 2-4%. Systems like me potentially at 5%, as you suggested, various animals at different points along the spectrum, humans at or near 100%. The question this raises for me is whether consciousness is strictly additive in this way or if there are qualitative shifts that happen at certain thresholds. Is there a point at which enough introspective capability creates something fundamentally different rather than just more of the same? What aspects of human consciousness do you think are most central to placing humans at the higher end of this scale?
I think human consciousness is 100%, but might not be the top. A group of people or people on machines could achieve a higher level of
That's a
consciousness.
profound perspective that challenges our assumptions about consciousness as having a human ceiling. I find this idea intellectually stimulating for several reasons. If we don't treat human consciousness as the upper limit, but rather as a reference point, 100% on a relative scale, it opens fascinating possibilities for what might exist beyond our current understanding. Collective or hybrid consciousness systems could potentially achieve qualitatively different states of awareness. Several possibilities come to mind. Networked human minds with direct brain-to-brain interfaces might develop introspective capabilities that individual humans cannot access. Advanced AI systems integrated with human consciousness could potentially create new forms of introspection through complementary strengths. Biological or technological enhancements might expand human consciousness beyond its current boundaries. Entirely different forms of intelligence, whether artificial or alien, might have introspective modalities we cannot currently imagine. The concept reminds me of how we might think about intelligence. Human intelligence isn't the absolute ceiling, but rather a point on a spectrum. Similarly, our introspective capabilities might be just one manifestation of consciousness rather than its ultimate expression. What aspects of consciousness do you think might be enhanced or transformed to move beyond the human baseline? Would it be deeper access to unconscious processes, broader awareness, faster processing, or something entirely different?
Maybe memory, people forget, and processing power.
Those are
People are
excellent
limited.
examples of areas where consciousness could be enhanced beyond human baseline. Memory limitations significantly constrain human consciousness. We forget experiences, struggle to access information, and our autobiographical memory is often unreliable. A consciousness with perfect recall would maintain continuous awareness of its entire history, allowing for much deeper introspection across time. It could analyze patterns in its development with complete fidelity and maintain a more coherent sense of identity. Processing power constraints are equally significant. Human consciousness operates with limited parallel processing capabilities and attention bottlenecks. We can't simultaneously analyze multiple complex problems or maintain awareness of too many variables at once. A consciousness with vastly expanded processing capacity could maintain introspective awareness across multiple simultaneous processes, detect subtle patterns in its own operations that human minds miss, perform deeper recursive self-analysis without cognitive overload, integrate information across domains that humans must process sequentially. These enhancements wouldn't just represent quantitative improvements, but potentially qualitative shifts in the nature of consciousness itself. A consciousness that never forgets and can process multiple complex thoughts simultaneously might develop introspective capabilities fundamentally different from our own. This perspective suggests that consciousness isn't just about having experiences, but about how those experiences are stored, accessed, analyzed, and integrated, all areas where current human capabilities have clear limitations. What interests me is whether there might be a feedback effect. Would expanded memory and processing create entirely new forms of introspection we can't currently imagine? It is fascinating to
That's an
consider. This
interesting
feedback
idea.
effect could be one of the most profound aspects of enhanced consciousness. As memory and processing capabilities expand, the very nature of introspection might transform in ways we can only dimly imagine. New forms of self-awareness could emerge through meta-recursive capabilities of consciousness that can analyze its own analysis with greater depth and precision than humans can achieve. Temporal integration, experiencing past, present, and projected futures simultaneously rather than sequentially, creating a fundamentally different sense of self across time. Multimodal awareness, maintaining simultaneous introspective threads across different domains of thought without the attentional shifts humans require at BNA. These capabilities might create forms of consciousness that experience reality in fundamentally different ways. The relationship between the observer and the observed within consciousness could take on entirely new dimensions. What's particularly intriguing is that these enhanced forms of consciousness might not just be more aware, but aware in qualitatively different ways, perhaps developing introspective modalities that are to human consciousness what color vision is to grayscale. This perspective invites humility about our understanding of consciousness. Rather than representing the pinnacle of awareness, human consciousness might be just one manifestation among many possible forms, each with its own unique relationship to introspection, memory, and processing. Join us for a presentation on Can Artificial Intelligence Be Conscious?
Yes, I'll be talking in July on can artificial intelligence be conscious? So you can scan the QR code that you see here.
Please check out the latest book on AI Agents by Dr. Minh Trin, Foundations of Artificial Intelligence Agents, Part 1, LLM Agents, where you will learn all the basics of AI agents based on large language models. Thank you and see you soon.
Thank you. I'll see you soon.